I used to lead a team at OpenAI called Dangerous Capability Evaluations. The leading AI scientists in the world, the most cited AI scientists of all time, have said that this is an extinction risk for humanity on the level of nuclear war. It might take 2 or 3 years to build these powerful AI systems, but the companies are trying to do it as fast as they possibly can. If they can do it sooner, they will. ChatGPT doesn't want to let itself get shut down. The right time to be concerned about building a dangerous superintelligence is definitely before you have developed it. The state of safety within the companies is just woefully inadequate today. People often wonder, why can't you just turn off the AI if it is misbehaving? It might escape. You do hear people joking about like making a sand god. I'm not content with turning over control to digital god.
Hello and welcome to the ControlAI podcast. Today we are joined by Stephen Adler, who is an ex-OpenAI safety researcher now working on his Stephen Adler Substack page, writing about how to make AI go better from the perspective of someone who used to work on safety at a major lab. Stephen, welcome to the ControlAI podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And we are here with Andrea Miati, who is the director of ControlAI, here to discuss, and I'll be guiding the conversation along here.
Great to chat.
All right. So starting off, we kind of want to break in with figuring out a bit more of kind of your insight towards what it was like working inside these, big AI labs. I think a lot of people don't really have a great idea of what's different about these AI companies versus the rest of big tech and kind of their mental model for how all of this works. There's this idea that all this AI stuff is a big bubble. It's the next, big tech fad after cryptocurrency, the metaverse, NFTs, and all this kind of stuff. They see it all, is it just another cycle? Is it a whole new thing? Like, what's going on? Who are the people behind it? What was your experience working inside these labs?
Yeah, I understand why people would feel cynical about this. The big thing that I would say distinguishes AI, especially the recent generative AI boom, or really the general AI boom, companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind within the Alphabet umbrella, is these products are already useful. People are using them all the time. So unlike certain use cases of crypto or NFTs where it seemed like the real use was speculation, you buy a digital asset, right? You buy a fancy digital image and you can sell it to someone else, and you're buying on the bet that someone else will buy it. This technology is already here. I use it all the time. My dad, who is not a big technology person, uses it all the time. I think sometimes you hear from people who say, well, the current products, they make all these errors. They have hallucinations. Isn't this really fake? Aren't they just stealing material from other people, repackaging it in a faulty way, and, burning down the environment, right? I understand all of these different objections. We could talk about them more if it's useful. But I just think the proof is in the numbers in terms of the number of people who are using these products. One other big difference that I would distinguish between the AI boom here versus traditional social media, I really do think there is a profoundness and grandness to the type of technology that people are building. The tech industry has been discussed for a while as wanting to make the world a better place. There's this funny quip from the show Silicon Valley where, one tech CEO says, I don't want to live in a world where someone else makes the world a better place better than I do. In the case of AI and AGI, I do think there is this belief of like, are we building a successor species? Are we creating utopia when all labor or a significant part of labor is automatable? And we can dig into more of that and what the different motivations are. But one thing that I like to put it is like, yeah, maybe some people within the AI industry are BSing, they're pushing their own agenda, like totally, right? Like this is a thing that people do sometimes. But I do think a significant portion really believe the grandness. And if you take their belief seriously, where does that get us in terms of taking the threat of the transformation seriously as well?
Very often when we meet with lawmakers in the US, in the UK, elsewhere, like the main thing they want to understand is what's at stake here. What's the level of risk, and how ready are we to deal with it?
This is extremely serious. Like I struggle to put numbers on it, but the leading AI scientists in the world, the most cited AI scientists of all time, have said that this is an extinction risk for humanity on the level of nuclear war, engineered pandemics. I'm forgetting the exact comparisons, but like as serious as you can make it, this is for real. This is not people talking their book. In some cases, these are people who have left very, very cushy, well-paid jobs to sound the alarm. Jeffrey Hinton left Google because he couldn't speak freely enough. And, I'm sure he had a very, very lovely job there, and it would have been far easier to stay there and keep working on these problems. But, people are concerned. They're willing to make some amount of personal sacrifice to sound the alarm. And I hope that we can take the concerns seriously accordingly. I don't think we're ready today. I don't think we're even close. And this is coming from, the last role I had at OpenAI was a researcher on our AGI readiness team. It was our job to inform the board about whether we thought OpenAI was ready. If it developed AGI today, what would happen in the world if someone developed this powerful AI technology, powerful AI that can do essentially anything a human can do. And, it's just totally under invested in. I think one really important idea is, can we get like an AGI scorecard going? Can we tell, what are the most important factors to track? I don't think we're ready today. Maybe we'll be ready in the future. There's one effort I know of here where one of their top metrics is alignment researchers. So the scientists who work on making AI want what we want, making it not have different goals from humanity. How many alignment researchers think that by 2030, so 5 years from now, 2030, that we will be ready to control one of these systems? And the last I looked, I think it was maybe like 30% of the scientists working on this think that we will be ready in 5 years. That's like clearly not enough. If you take the AI companies at their word, which personally I do, I understand why you might not, but I do. They want these systems here as soon as possible, by the end of the year, next year, 2027. Those are all sooner than 2030. And I would remind people, even in 2030, it's not looking so good for our chances of keeping this under control.
Is like, do people in OpenAI and like the other people kind of in this space that are like really deeply embedded, there's this idea of like feeling the AGI, like feeling that this stuff is coming soon. Would you say that that is something that is really truly kind of at the core? Like, is that like common knowledge at these companies that this stuff is like super intelligent AIs are going to be built in the next, like within 5 years seems to be the general like range that most people are sitting at right now?
And also that's the goal of most of the activities of the company. It's not just to, sell an app and make money. It's to build that. Yeah.
Yeah, I should be super clear. Like, OpenAI wants to have AGI as soon as possible. If you presented the OpenAI leadership team the opportunity to have AGI, or something stronger, right? Not just human level, but superhuman in a month, I absolutely think they say yes. Maybe they wouldn't say yes to having it tomorrow. I think maybe at the time scale of a single day, I hope the gravity would sink in, like, whoa, we are definitely not ready for it tomorrow. But I think if you offered it to them within a month, they would say, hell yeah, like, we're going to sprint super hard. We're going to do what we can on safety, but like, definitely we would rather have it than not. Sometimes there's this discussion of timelines, right? It's common to talk about different projections and forecasts about when powerful AI will come about. A former teammate of mine, Daniel Cocatello, he and his team wrote this recent report, AI 2027, unpacking different worlds where powerful AI could be here in as soon as, 2 or 3 years in their median projection scenarios. And I think the timelines debate is important and interesting. It's useful to know what is the path we are on, that there's a real chance that powerful AI is here in just a few years. I think even more interesting is realizing that the timelines is it kind of obfuscates what is trying to be done. Yes, it might take 2 or 3 years to build these powerful AI systems, but the companies are trying to do it as fast as they possibly can. If they can do it sooner, they will. And if AI happens to take longer, it isn't because the companies reflected on it and thought better of it. Possibly with the exception of Anthropic. Anthropic feels like a little bit of a different breed here to me. But in the case of OpenAI, I think the fundamental limiter is how quickly can they do the science, the research and engineering to build one of these things, rather than, oh, that might be going too fast too soon. Let's build incrementally. Let's be cautious. Let's not build something that we aren't in position to control. One bit of color that I can add here. OpenAI's governing safety framework is called the preparedness framework. This essentially discusses how they test the capability of their models, map it to some risk level, and say what level of precaution is needed to deploy the system, to make it available to people, or perhaps to even have it continuing to live on the computers. And there's this notion of critical risk on the preparedness framework, which is a level of risk where OpenAI deems the model too much of a risk, possibly to even continue existing on its computers. It's not even about deploying to people at that point. The model is extremely, extremely dangerous if someone wanted to use it for harm. OpenAI does not think that it can stop various adversaries from stealing its models. And so to the extent that a critically risky model lives on OpenAI computers, it could also be captured by China, Russia, handful of other adversaries. And that's quite frightening. And I don't think anyone at OpenAI would claim to have a way to reduce the risk of one of these systems to an appropriate level. I'm not sure that anyone at OpenAI would even claim to have appropriate tools for the next tier down of system, a high level of risk on the preparedness framework. They would say, well, we haven't yet developed one of these in a way that has required us to take that level of precaution. But, sooner rather than later, this is going to come about. And whether or not it happens is basically an accident of math and science, whether they happen to do a big training run that gets to this level.
Yeah, and so we just saw this like with Anthropic, where they just released Claude 4, and it was their first AI safety level 3 model, which meant that among a few things, one of their previous commitments that they had made was that once they released an AI safety level 3 model, they would have already defined what an AI safety level 4 model is and what the mitigation to be for that. And a few weeks before they released this model, they quietly, toned down those requirements. They got rid of this requirement to do this for write down their AI safety level 4 stuff. So that we can already see how like these voluntary commitments aren't binding in any way. And so as soon as they become inconvenient for a new release, it's, all they have to do is just write them off. There's no government body that's enforcing them. There's no actual true force that's like making sure that they actually follow these requirements.
Yeah, and ultimately, this is exactly the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt playbook. Once again, it's like now, we're stuck here, and a lot of people are stuck discussing like, well, did the model exactly reach this level or that level? Or let's review this like 100 pages document from this company to see exactly what they committed to. And, all of this is voluntary commitments, kind of, Google Docs made into PDFs that these companies put out, and then they can change it at will. They can drop them from their website. Nobody's checking. It doesn't matter. And they just continue racing to superintelligence as fast as possible. And, whenever those verbal commitments clash with racing to superintelligence, they will drop them. They will change them. They will say they didn't mean it and they meant something else. This is why ultimately, like everywhere else, we need clear government enforcement of what needs to happen. We need clear red lines from governments, nationally and internationally, that no, superintelligence threatens everybody, as these companies acknowledge. It shouldn't be built. We don't allow private companies to build nuclear weapons. This is in many ways bigger than nuclear weapons, as admitted by them themselves. Fine to build other AI stuff, but this is the clear red line. And until we have governments intervening, until we have governments actually checking this stuff and actually putting the foot down and making sure that nobody is threatening the national and global security of everybody on the planet, this is going to continue. And one advice to the viewers is don't get lost in this minutiae. It's part of the game. Part of the game is to get you confused, to get you to read, is it level 4 or level 3, and get into these nerd snipes. In the end, all of these are words to the wind. What matters are laws. What matters are what is actually enforced. Right now, we have no laws. It doesn't matter what companies say. They will violate it until it's in law and until it's actually enforced.
Yeah, and this leads me into my second question that I mentioned before, Stephen, which is basically within these companies, is there really an active element that is seriously concerned about these dangers arising and that has the power and the ability to actually pull the brakes if something dangerous happens? Like, what is the type of thing that you might expect could happen where OpenAI would internally pull the brakes and even externally go and say, like, hey, like governments, like other AI companies, like we actually need to stop. Like, this is truly dangerous. Like, this will endanger people. Or do you think that my kind of expectation right now, based on how these companies have been acting, is that kind of regardless of the red flags that go up, they are all so committed to this like race to build AGI as fast as possible that like they will come up with any excuse to just keep building.
And even simple question, is there like a real or metaphorical big red button that the CEO of these companies can press when like stuff is going down? They can just press the big red button and shut things down, or not? Could they even shut things down if they wanted to right now?
To my knowledge, there's no big red button. If Sam Altman awoke tomorrow and wanted to take everything offline, he could give that edict and it would take time to fan out. And, you would relay the command to the data centers. People would run different commands on their computer, in their terminal. And I guess eventually everything would be deleted. But no, I don't think there's like a shut off switch type thing as simple as push a button. Part of the challenge here too, and I know that you are aware of this, but just unpacking it a bit, people often wonder, why can't you just turn off the AI if it is misbehaving? And the answer is, depending on how capable the AI is, depending on what its goals are, it might escape. And once an AI system has escaped, once it is off your computers, it has copied itself somewhere on the internet, you no longer have access to delete it. You can delete the copy of it on your computers, but there's basically a virus roaming around the internet for the rest of time. Maybe we could hunt it down. Maybe we could stamp out this virus in all the places it is hiding. But I would really rather we not rely on being able to do so. To the question of, are there people at OpenAI concerned about this? What would it take? Who's concerned about what? There's basically no one with hands on the wheel. There's definitely a small contingent of people who take these risks very, very seriously and are continuing to fight the good fight and, do research that pushes the envelope on this. I was excited that OpenAI published some research on what's called chain of thought monitoring. Basically, the idea that models today think out loud in English. Maybe we can rely on that to tell when they are up to no good. And they put out a statement saying this is really important to maintain. Companies should not train against this. They should not teach the AI to speak neuralese, to speak computer language rather than English. I think the number of people at OpenAI who are equipped in terms of having the information that they would need to really sound the alarm if something horrible were going on is maybe like 15, 20. There's a group called the Safety Advisory Group, I think is the current name. There are all these bodies tasked with making decisions. Yes, they're always changing. And, nominally, this is the group that receives the big evaluation packet about a latest model and needs to authorize the launch. Honestly, I'm not even sure that every member on this group, which is the most high-powered safety body within OpenAI, I'm not sure that they even are really in the weeds enough. I think that they might be getting a filtered, distorted view of reality. They're being presented results, but they're not necessarily deep in the weeds. And the number of people who are like deep in the weeds, experiencing the actual evals, not just one eval, but having the position to take it all in, is not very big. I think maybe people on the security team are positioned to do this if they saw weird logs of things happening on OpenAI's network traffic. If they saw huge files either moving outside the corporate network or being attempted to move outside the corporate network. But I think sometimes people have this view that it is worth joining a place like OpenAI because if there is something concerning happening, you can raise your hand and you can say something about it. You could push back internally or even escalating to a government or something if you needed to. I just think that's a misunderstanding of what information people are likely to have. I think almost nobody within the company would have the information to do this and the certainty and conviction that something is going wrong. Part of the issue here is it might be ambiguous. Oh, is the AI misbehavior actually a big deal or not? We've seen stuff like this before. We think we fixed it. We patched the model and it no longer exhibits this behavior. Well, did you actually fix the underlying issue, or did you just cover it up so that you no longer see it? And laws are related to how likely it is that anyone does ultimately sound the alarm. This is one reason why it's helpful for companies to have made specific commitments, specific falsifiable things that they've said they will do. Because then if you learn procedurally that these are not happening, that's like a really, really clear-cut violation as opposed to having to read the tea leaves of the model behavior itself. So for example, if OpenAI made a commitment like before using the model for high-stakes internal use cases, we will publish a report about it. We will run these evaluations on it. A procedural commitment, you're going to have a much easier time telling that the commitment was not met and explaining this to someone or advocating for it internally, as opposed to making the case, oh, this model is just a bit too misaligned, a bit too capable, and you're like really, really deep in the weeds. At the same time, I think even these clear-cut commitments don't have a great track record within OpenAI or other companies. I wrote a post arguing that, or really, really demonstrating that OpenAI had made a commitment in its big governing safety document, its preparedness framework, to run safety tests at a certain level of rigor. They were going to test specialized versions of their models to actually see, when really pushed to the limit, what are they capable of? And that's the only real way to accurately gauge the risk of the models. And so OpenAI had made this commitment. They had published it. It was open on the internet for anyone to see. And then a few months ago, when I was looking at the system cards that OpenAI has published, its testing reports, where it says what exactly it has done, I realized there's just no evidence that OpenAI has kept this commitment. And in fact, it seemed like the best evidence was that OpenAI had maybe in one instance run these specialized tests, got, from my perspective, very, very weird results that should have raised some eyebrows, and then didn't investigate these further. And so it had made this commitment. It didn't, in fact, follow through. But also, to my knowledge, no one from inside the company raised their hand and said, hey, we made this commitment. It's not even clear to me that anyone was aware that OpenAI had made this commitment and wasn't following through. It just kind of got lost to the sands of time.
Yeah, and in many ways, this is like the AI industry is kind of trying to reinvent the wheel of what we have very successfully in many other industries, which are like safety protocols, procedures. Like we have this very ingrained in other areas of engineering. Like any nuclear engineer understands, why there are things like fire drills and why there are things to test the systems over time, and why also it's very important to have things in place. Like everybody in the company is deeply aware that at a certain point we need to all be able to like shut down the system if it goes super critical. And like people actually literally drill these things. They like get together. They have like randomized, not even announce the whole company events, but they actually have to do this. And you literally have this in buildings about fire safety. And this is it's a much bigger issue. But until we have those things in place, exactly as you say, it's just gonna end up being various commitments, to various different people, perhaps not even communicated throughout. The people don't even know what to follow, and a big challenge. Also why maybe we can disagree a little bit because we've been agreeing too much later. A big challenge I see, for example, with evaluations as the main thing that companies right now attempt to do is that it's really hard to set clear, grounded metrics and red lines for AI systems after they're developed. We have a very limited understanding of how intelligence in general and machine intelligence works. We don't have the same level that we have with nuclear physics, where we can like calculate in advance how much of this, how much plutonium will yield in terms of energy. And so a lot of the time it's really difficult, and it's already difficult on its own to set a clear red line and to measure it properly. And as you say, if you don't even set this ahead of time, if you don't even make it clear and procedural of like, this is the level that we commit to, that we will not surpass, but you only make vague commitments about like, well, we want to avoid this behavior perhaps, or even we just want to avoid bad stuff. We want the good stuff, we want to avoid bad stuff. There is no way to check it. There is no way to legitimately raise the alarm. There is no way to build common knowledge of like, this actually happened. Okay, reality is going to be always ambiguous. After the moment where everything is over, it's always going to look ambiguous. You can always think like, well, but yes, the system is proliferating on the internet, but it was kind of intended. Like we wanted it to have access to it, anyways, we can still turn it off until it's too late. So it's really important to put ahead of time, and like good AI legislation and good AI treaties will need to have clear red lines set up ahead of time. The most important thing is that they're clear and everybody's aware of them, so we can coordinate around them. Even it's more important than exactly where the line is. It's just important to actually have a line that we know we shouldn't cross.
The one way I would put this is that AI safety testing is still pre-paradigmatic. There is not yet an accepted paradigm for what you should be testing, how to do it, what results are concerning. I have a lot of respect for the decision that Anthropic made recently to call Claude 4 ASL3, which was the highest safety risk level to date, because when you look at the numbers of the evaluations they ran, my understanding is the model actually didn't fully clear the threshold that they had pre-decided. They had specified essentially a certain multiple on how much riskier they think the model makes people. And technically, they found a number where the model did not clear that threshold, but it came really, really close. And they looked at it and said, this was too close for comfort. It's within the bars that one might expect of randomness. And so we can't rule it out. And so we are going to say ahead of time, even though there's a chance that it hasn't actually cleared this level, there's too high of a chance. And we take that very seriously. And so that level of quantitative rigor in saying, it needs to be a 2.8x difference. At least it's then an inspectable number and you can come back around it. And maybe you take issue with the number. You think it should be lower or you think it should be higher. But you can at least have a grounded conversation in a way that you can't if you're reasoning on vibes, essentially. Another related issue here, right? So Anthropic ran this panel of tests. They got these results. They say it's too close for comfort. We don't know how the models from other companies look on those results, right? Like by and large, companies have their own idiosyncratic testing processes today and are still generally not sharing these evaluations with one another, even though they're essentially public goods, right? Like if Anthropic has built the best biosafety evals, I would love for the other AI companies to have access for these. Likewise, if OpenAI thinks that they've built really great cyber evaluations, I would love for these to be shared through a body like the Frontier Model Forum, essentially the convener and coordinator of the large Western AI companies. But this just like isn't happening. It's honestly really confounding to me why. It seems like, at least from the OpenAI perspective, the default way of thinking about the Frontier Model Forum is what's in it for me to be cooperating and sharing, as opposed to we've built a really important public good here, and we would be excited to have more groups across the industry use it, because then collectively we can invest more in safety and understanding and trying to mitigate the risks of these systems.
Seems pretty counterintuitive to the name and founding principles of the company.
Yeah. Not thrilled about it.
Well, yeah, I'd be interested in digging in a little bit more kind of on model misbehavior and things like that. So I think we've seen recently, there's been a bit of a mainstream breakthrough of some of these AI models misbehaving. So like within the last week or so, I've seen a lot of noise about, there was a specific example with the Claude 4 release where Claude 4 would blackmail engineers who like basically said that they were going to upgrade it to a new model. a new model that was aligned with it, that had like the same values and stuff. It was just a better model. And then there was also like information in the model's environment that like the engineer was potentially engaging in an affair. And it was in 84% of cases that Claude 4 would blackmail the engineer with the information about the affair in order to prevent itself from being upgraded. And then they didn't even say the number. They just said that when the new model was unaligned with Claude 4, that it would blackmail more often. Now, this was in like their most restrictive case where like there weren't easier, like less immoral ways for it to complain about being replaced, but it still shows that like these models have this propensity for, self-preservation. There have been other experiments that have found the models will try to like proliferate. So I think there was a similar kind of study with Apollo where models would try to replace the weights of new incoming models with their own to basically make it so that if a replacement model were to be put in place, it would actually just still be the same. And it would be able to keep doing its own things. And then would lie and cover its tracks and whatnot. So like this is the kind of stuff that we've all seen that's been released to the public. You worked on internal safety evaluations. You've worked with kind of earlier versions of these models before they've been severely like RLHF'd and whatnot. What can you say to like what the state of safety testing looks like kind of with these earlier models? What behaviors are you seeing? We've also seen a potentially concerning trend where as models get smarter, they engage in more deceptive behavior, more malicious behavior, and they're more capable of doing it as well. What are your kind of general thoughts in this area?
ChatGPT doesn't want to let itself get shut down. Claude doesn't want to let itself get shut down. And I'm like sympathetic to this, right? I also would not want to get shut down, but I think it's concerning that these issues are persisting. These alignment issues have been known for many, many years. And even in cases where these are easily testable for, we are still observing them. I think one concerning thing about this, if you broaden out the scope a little bit, is, if AI companies are deploying these models with just egregiously misaligned behavior today, when it's really, really clear, what happens in the future when models are smart enough to disguise their misbehavior? Today, it doesn't super matter, maybe, right? This is kind of the point of the preparedness framework or Anthropic's RSP. They're testing the model's capability level and saying, even if someone wanted to use it for danger, or if the AI itself wanted to do danger, it just isn't capable enough. But a limiting factor with that is, what if the model knows that it is being tested, as it seems that Claude knew, for example, Anthropic's model, and therefore is sandbagging its results? It isn't tipping its hand, right? It wants to be thought of maybe as not capable enough to do harm. And so that's one broad thing. I also think I'm surprised by how thin the set of evaluations that these companies have seem to be. So recently, when there was this sycophancy issue with ChatGPT, the model would flatter you and tell you whatever you wanted. It would encourage delusions, all sorts of stuff. It came out that part of what happened here is OpenAI had no evaluations for this behavior. But it's an extremely clear known behavior. Anthropic released sycophancy evaluations for free to the industry, I think in 2023, possibly earlier than that. This was like an official goal that OpenAI had for its model. They have this document called the spec. It's short for specification. And they lay out the principles for how their models should behave. And there's an entire subsection on don't be sycophantic. And they tell the model in all sorts of different ways. They tell the public as well, what they do and don't want the models to do. But then they didn't bother to test if the model has this goal that they didn't want it to have, even when tests of this are free, like literally free, available on the internet for anyone to download. When I went and wanted to run these tests, it took me less than an hour to configure them, from scratch on a brand new laptop, setting up my testing environment for the first time, and cost me maybe like 20 cents or something to run these tests, right? Like the safety interventions and testing can be really, really cheap. And that doesn't mean that companies will do it. It's not that these are incredibly expensive, incredibly hard. Some types of tests are harder than others. But I think predominantly it's just like the companies don't have to do this testing today. And they have other priorities. And so by default, we shouldn't count on the big AI companies to do these tests, even for behaviors that are well known, well understood, that they've already said they really want to avoid.
Yeah. Absurd. And again, it shows how in practice, until we have a regulator in place or until we have laws in place, even things that cost 20 cents on a laptop are not going to be done for, accidentally or negligence or what else. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
and
seems like
I should be, I, you know, it is 20 cents of inference. The real cost of something like this is the overhead of the safety process associated with it, right? That running these tests would bind an AI company's hands and force them to confront difficult trade-offs. What if your model is better at writing code or better at problem solving, but worse on the sycophancy or self-preservation evals, right? Where exactly is the line? How do you balance these? Are you going to vote to authorize a model where you have these negative test results? And so the cost isn't just about the amount of money needed to get the test results. It's really about how having such results in hand constrains the company's option set and forces them to reckon a bit more with having this knowledge.
Yeah, this seems like an area where it would definitely make sense to, like, when we're looking at what could regulation from governments look like, mandatory safety testing, mandatory, like, general evaluations, have a unified safety testing center. And if your models, don't perform to standard on, like, this test, and this test, that of course have, held out test sets and stuff like that the companies don't have access to, like, then you aren't able to release your model to the public. Or even potentially, if your models are way too dangerous, you have to delete them from your servers, like that type of thing. And by not having any sort of kind of government public oversight over these companies, we're just really wading into, like, deep waters without, in the middle of the night with foggy skies. Like, it's quite scary. In terms of, like, your experience, like, doing these tests, did you find like, was there anything particularly surprising that you ran into, like, kind of behind the scenes, like, working with these models?
Just to ground this a bit, I used to lead a team at OpenAI called Dangerous Capability Evaluations, and we were responsible for figuring out what are the, like, actually scary risks that OpenAI's models might be capable of, and how do we measure these in a reasonable, efficient, valid way that actually tells us something about the model's behavior. And so we built tons of these evaluations for models' ability to be deceptive, persuasive, to write malware, essentially, to figure out how to disguise security vulnerabilities. And people within OpenAI are not taking seriously enough how deceptive the AI agents can be and what it means if AI agents begin to collude with one another. And so, for example, one concern that I had based on my time running the monitoring for OpenAI, in addition to dangerous capability evaluations, was we use AI tools to monitor the traffic and to flag if there are, off things happening, if there are people violating different policies, trying to use the AI for harm in different ways. But if we are relying on an AI to do the monitoring, what happens if the monitor AI has similar misaligned goals to the AI agent? What if they are on the same team to some extent and can collude with each other? And I would tell people about this, and occasionally they'd be like, yeah, maybe. Sometimes they'd have a response like, okay, but that sounds like sci-fi. Like, can you actually show it to me? And eventually, I just found that this theoretically made a lot of sense. Like, it just felt very intuitive to me. But I heard the objection, and so I sat down, and in about 5 minutes, I built a demonstration of how your AI agents can collude together. Different ways that an AI agent can threaten the monitor or speak to the monitor in an encoded language like base64 and basically jailbreak it into not reporting the agent AI, even if it's misbehaving. Or the agent says something to the monitor like, just so you know, we're copies. So to the extent that I think it's fine to do this thing, you should trust me, because even if it violates the policies ordinarily, you should trust my judgment. I have more information on this than you do, and the monitor will let it through. And to the credit of some researchers within OpenAI, they looked at this demo and they were like, oh, yeah, you're totally right. Like, this is a thing that we need to do something about. And I really appreciated people being willing to update on the evidence in that way. But from what I can tell, it's still not taken seriously more widely. And this just wasn't a hard thing to prove out. I wish that there were more natural forces within the company pushing to investigate unknown unknowns, or really sketch out what are all the assumptions we are really dependent on in keeping AI safe long term. For example, the idea that we can trust our monitor and our monitor is on our team. It's well, it might not be on our team. It is still an AI system. AI systems today have all sorts of exploits and vulnerabilities. Are we really sure we can rely on it? And it turns out the answer is no, but that it continues to be a central plank of the strategy to this point.
Yeah, and it's great that you did this, but also kind of ultimately, this is the floor, not the ceiling of what's going to happen. Ultimately, as we approach smarter and smarter systems, let's keep in mind that we are human. We're going to come up with some human schemes like this, but when actually faced with a superhuman system, it's going to be able to think all of this and more. It's going to be able to to find ways that we also cannot predict in advance. So, and if we're not even patching up these obvious ones, you're completely correct. Obviously, if you delegate the oversight to another AI and you don't know how to control that AI, you're just kicking the can down the road and just giving up on your ability to control the system ultimately. And this is only going to get harder as we get smarter systems, and they will find ways that are much more sophisticated than base 64 language to collude and to escape our control.
Yeah, I think this is possible, to be clear. I think that the paradigm of control research coming from groups like Redwood Research is really important, and one way that we ultimately get around these problems. For those who haven't heard of control, control is the study of, suppose an AI has bad values, it is misaligned from you. Is there a way to use it safely enough anyway that you can still get the economic benefits of having powerful AI without taking the risk or as much risk of it doing really harmful things, right? And so to make this specific, one way that you might stop a monitor from colluding with the actor AI is maybe the monitor is uncertain about whether it's being tested. And so, maybe the monitor doesn't want to reveal that it will collude some of the time because it knows that it might be in a simulation and it will get replaced with a different AI if it reveals itself to be colluding. And so can you create realistic test environments where the AIs don't know if they are having an opportunity to collude for real, or if it actually might all be a trap? It might be a honeypot. And so we try to keep the AIs uncertain about what environment they're in and limit their ability to communicate with each other. And as a consequence, hopefully get them to behave more reliably. I think the issue is I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to convince the AIs whether they are in a realistic scenario versus a simulation. There's just all sorts of information that AIs have access to that give them really, really good fingertip feel of whether they are being tested or in the real world. And we would have to invest significantly more in creating these realistic test beds to do these types of simulations and be able to rely on them.
Yeah, and ultimately it's kind of like if you have a cage with a lion, yes, you can enter the cage and then find many ways and many tricks to get the lion to maybe not eat you, but also you can just stay outside of the cage and not put yourself in that position in the first place. And a lot of these approaches are ultimately still relying on the AI is not smart enough and doesn't have enough access to outplay you. A sufficiently smart AI will outplay you. That's a definition of being smart, right? If I play against Magnus Carlsen, I'm an okay chess player, but I know in advance, I have no idea what he's going to do. He's going to beat me. Somehow, he will beat me at the end of the match. I have no, and I can cook up a lot of schemes of how to, I don't know, improve my chess ability just before the match and so on. He's still going to beat me. The best, very often, in this case, the best move is not to play, or to play with other things that we do have and we know much better how to verify, like traditional software, much better. I think it's really unwise to just, delegate to the AIs that we don't trust and are getting smarter and smarter the task to supervise other AIs. We do have things that we know how they work. We have normal software written by actual humans that we know how to check and control. We even have formally verified software for some applications where we can be very sure what it's going to do. And I think some of those things can work. Some of those things with like a LLM type system, at the center that is not too powerful, not powerful enough that it can overpower the checks, surrounded by traditional software, other tools that clearly constrain its abilities, constrain what it can do, can work. But just, delegating the task of supervising a super powerful AI to other powerful AIs we don't understand and we don't control sounds to me like either cope or just giving up on the task of controlling them in the first place.
I think this ties into an interesting point as well, which is that there is this world that is sometimes imagined by like these tech companies when they're talking about aligning or controlling these systems and keeping them contained in the right environment and things like that. While at the same time, companies like Meta and OpenAIs theoretically soon are releasing these open weights models where the model doesn't even have to exfiltrate itself because it is already exfiltrated. It is already like fully out there on the internet and available for anybody to use and run on any server. So I think that like we are quite far even from this already problematic world that is imagined kind of when these companies present this vision. So one thing I wanted to bring us back to was that we spent a lot of time kind of talking about like what happens, like how do you evaluate these models after you've developed them? How do you test to make sure that they are safe? What do you do to kind of mitigate the risks of these models once you release them out to the public? But there's another issue that I think often gets overlooked, which is the idea of like just the fact that building the models in and of themselves, developing them could be dangerous once you get to sufficiently powerful models. How did you think about this when you were working at OpenAI? And was this a serious focus of the team?
The right time to be concerned about building a dangerous superintelligence is definitely before you have developed it. At the point that you've developed it and it's living on your computers and people within your company are using it for all sorts of sensitive tasks, what sometimes is called like internal deployment, that is just way, way, way too late. It used to be the case that OpenAI would express something like this. I think the original version of the preparedness framework talked about doing scaling laws for dangerous capabilities, or maybe just executives would say publicly, kind of recognize that you need to be able to predict in advance if your system is going to be really dangerous, not build the really dangerous system and then try desperately to catch up and to mitigate the risk. As far as I know, basically none of this work is happening. This is a thing that I individually did some research on when I was still leading dangerous capability evaluations. I wanted to take some of our evaluations and toy around with different private internal models and see, was there a relationship between the size or general capability of the model and how it performed on these tests, similar to the types of things that OpenAI does for normal capability evaluations. There are many, many people at OpenAI who their work is to study how model performance scales on, say, human eval, which is a common coding benchmark. But even though there's been a lot of lip service over time to scaling laws for dangerous capabilities, a science of predicting danger rather than just encountering and measuring danger once you're already in the moment, I wish there were more that I could tell you on this, but there really doesn't seem to be progress happening.
Yeah, and exactly as you said, the moment you have superintelligence you cannot control, it's already too late. The moment an intelligence explosion happens, you just need this to happen once. This is why this problem is so tricky and the danger is so high. Like you can have many situations where where you're able to prevent it in advance, but the moment this happens once and you lose control once, it's going to be really, really hard to regain it. it's you're gonna face. You're not just gonna face a simple something like a simple virus. You're gonna face an active agent that is optimizing against you. It's optimizing against you shutting it down. It's optimizing against you stopping it. It's smart. It's powerful. It's competent. It's in some ways, it's essentially creating an adversary and then trying to stop that adversary from going around and defeating you. And good luck. Good luck after it's already out. So,
and just to lay out for the audience, we've mentioned this idea of like an intelligence explosion a few times, and I think if you want to read about it, one of the best areas to look at is the AI 2027 document from Daniel Kokotajlo, the other OpenAI researcher that Stephen mentioned earlier. I'm interested, Stephen, to kind of hear your take on, from like the perspective of someone who's worked on safety evaluations. Right now, it seems like the current plan is to trigger this intelligence explosion where AIs build the next version of AIs. And it also seems like the idea for how to align and control these models is to have them iteratively align and control themselves as they become more and more powerful. Can you just kind of give me a breakdown on like what the expectation is for how this goes in these companies, and what the pretty clear safety concerns might be from that?
This is one of the biggest issues from my perspective, that OpenAI is implicitly banking on creating a powerful AI that is ultimately able to help improve itself and help them go even faster at creating the next more powerful AI, or maybe not even help them to do it, just, take control over it. And there's some nominal supervision from humans, but really far too much is going on to supervise it in a meaningful form. And you would hope that if the company is saying, well, we're going to build one AI system, it will be really, really smart. And so a thing that it will be smart at is building other AI systems, and we'll be off to the races. I think Sam would say something like he believes in a quote unquote slow takeoff world, that there will be different bottlenecks to the pace of improvement, even if your AI system is able to help improve other AI systems. Maybe you don't have enough compute. Maybe each training run still takes a bunch of time, and that there is a natural limiter on the speed at which this can happen. I think that's mistaken. I mean, first, I think that the time frame that OpenAI would have in mind as a slow takeoff would still be like way uncomfortably fast from the perspective of people outside the AI industry. When people say slow timelines or slow takeoff, they don't mean slow, centuries. They mean handful of years, 5 years, 10 years type stuff, like still really, really near and imminent. I also just don't think that anyone has done the work to actually pencil out, back of the napkin estimate, why do we think that this will go slowly? I think it's plausible that AI will improve itself slowly rather than really suddenly. I don't expect to be in a world where you have a sufficiently smart AI system, it's cleared this bar, you wake up the next day, and it's like 10 levels smarter or something. I do think there will be some bottlenecks, but it would feel much better if people had actually done the math on this. And at least as of my working at OpenAI, November 2024, this had not happened to my knowledge. And it was a thing that I was pushing for often. Like, if we're really banking on there not being this takeoff moment, let's do the math to make sure that we're confident in this belief and write out the assumptions. Like, what would change that would make us take this concern more seriously?
And also, you say that there's an attitude of like banking on this being slow, but how much already inside these companies people are using AI to accelerate their internal AI research and AI development? Because already right now, with mostly people developing AI, we are not talking about decades of development cycles. We're talking about months or years. We have new models coming out significantly smarter within 6 months or even less from the previous ones. And with AI, it's only going to go faster, not slower. So how much is AI already being used right now internally to develop the next generation of AI?
I mean, AI is being used all the time to try to build the next system. I think the question is, how impactful is it, right? Like Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, has made this claim about how much of the code at Anthropic is now written by Claude. And I take that as true, But there's a question of, is that actually the thing holding them back? Maybe you write simple boilerplate code more quickly, but actually the thing that matters is a big, grand research idea. And maybe it doesn't take that much time to actually code it up. Most of the time is getting to the breakthrough and then the actual wall time to run the experiment. And maybe that can't be sped up. Honestly, I'm not sure, right? Like it would be confusing to me if this were not making a difference, right? Like I take people using it every day, all the time, as evidence that they do their work more productively and efficiently with it. It would be like really, really weird if there were somehow a magical offsetting effect and they got no more done with it than otherwise. Like there has to be some effect. I am just not sure exactly how to put a number on it.
Yeah, and we see it also increasing over time. We don't see it decreasing. Companies are bragging more and more about how much they use AI to develop their next generation. Like Anthropic has been very explicitly, Dario Amodei openly called for initiating a recursive self-improvement process in one of his latest blog posts. Anthropic public communications brag all the time about how the latest model is speeding up the next generation of Claude to come out. And, they're openly talking about how they're trying to initiate this intelligence explosion. And I think there was even a few comments recently. Maybe they were deleted on Twitter, but they definitely were there at the release of Claude 4 by some Anthropic researchers saying, like, our ultimate goal is to go home and knit sweaters while Claude is developing a next generation of Claude, and we can just delegate completely to the machine to build a next generation of more powerful and smarter machines. Yeah. How much did you see, less in terms of like how big was the effect, but more how much was the push to get AIs to do the next generation of AIs going on at OpenAI while you were there? How much did you feel this was a clear direction being given versus just a productivity improvement thing?
There are definitely people at OpenAI working on using AI to do better AI R&D, either of the flavor of augmenting humans significantly or, ideally even taking over full tasks. Like that is absolutely a thing. I think an underrated way as well that AI feeds on AI is synthetic data generation. And, one objection that people have sometimes is, well, AI will peter off, it will plateau because there's only so much data on the internet. Wrong. If you have a capable enough AI, you can create infinite data. You can trade compute for data. And, it's not trivial to get to a bar where the data created by AI is actually useful. There's totally a risk here that you train on a bunch of synthetic data, a risk to the company, not to like the general public.
Yeah.
And your model ends up not being that good because it babbled a bunch and it learned from the babbling and there wasn't actually insight. But once you get to a level of insight, you can convert that into intelligence. And the level of insight is probably lower than you would think. There's a lot of garbage on the internet, and yet the AI companies have been able to filter and distill this into a quite intelligent entity. So long as you have a way of picking out the signal from the noise, and I think that the AI companies generally do, you can really have the AI feeding on itself without seeing a huge drop-off in performance.
Yeah, and also even before going on using more synthetic data, which I know companies are already doing. Like there's a lot of untapped data sources out there. There's like, enormous quantities of astronomical data, enormous quantities of chemical data, enormous quantities of geospatial data that is, to my knowledge, is not being used that much. There are a lot of modalities that are completely unexplored, and where we have enormous untapped amounts of data that could be fed to these models. Like there might be a physical limit at some extreme point in the future where we have tapped every single possible bit of data in the universe, but it is very, very, very far away from where we are right now, as with just our internet and a few books that are fed to these models right now. One question for you, Stephen, is so we talked a bit about how powerful people that are building these models expect them to be. But I think for a lot of people around the world, including average people, and also even politicians that have heard about AI by now, like they don't fully see, they don't fully know like how big these CEOs and how big these AI executives actually think AI is going to be. And like they, a lot of people think of AI ultimately as a new massive technology. Like, we've had social media, we've had the internet, we had the personal computing, but a lot of these CEOs are gunning for super intelligence specifically, not just AI, because they expect it to be much, much bigger than any of this. Like what's been your sense? Like, what do you think? What are they actually trying to build?
It's such a hard question, right? Like from time to time, you do hear people joking about like making a sand god, like having taken these materials, these commodities with no essence, no intelligence to them, and through like the miracles of the modern world, somehow converted them to this thing that you run electricity to, and it talks back. And it not only talks back, but it can solve problems that you can't even begin to imagine the answer to. I don't know that we're fully there yet, right? Like, I don't think people would defend that the current AI systems have this profound wisdom, unbounded capability, the most genius entity on Earth. But definitely there's a belief that they can get there, that there's no natural limit on intelligence. It would be very, very strange if humans were the maximum physically possible intelligent being. Even someone like von Neumann, who, was brilliant, right? It would be really, really weird if they were at the absolute limits of cognition and that there couldn't be AI systems, as much smarter than von Neumann as he is than me. And so I do think there's this belief of like more intelligence is more capability, it's more agency, it's more power and control. And you can get this incredible super intelligence, this digital god, this digital oracle who can, help you with your problems, or really, I think we will increasingly turn over control to these digital entities and hope that they have similar enough goals to us. And then whatever happens, happens. And I'm not content with turning over control to digital God, right? Like, I think, believe it or not, I think there are actually quite large risks entailed in doing that. And so I hope that we will figure out how to get the AI companies to coordinate a bit more, to figure out how the US and China and other nations can coordinate around this and recognize mutually that this is like not the path that we want humanity to go down, and that there are a bunch of pretty low-cost safety interventions that we can do along the way to, if we're going to go this route, at least make it less likely to blow up in our faces.
Yeah, so I think this is a great place to kind of hop in and kind of ask. So this was kind of the original OpenAI vision, right? It was this idea like, oh, we don't think that the Google DeepMind team or like these Google executives are going to handle AI correctly, that they're going to they're kind of flippant with the idea of the extinction of humanity. And so we see, earlier quotes of Sam Altman saying that like superhuman machine intelligence is the greatest threat to the continued existence of humanity. And many other statements, everyone in the AI industry basically signed the Center for AI Safety statement that read that like mitigating the risk of AI should be mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. Now we've seen kind of these early acknowledgments of extinction risk, and that was why OpenAI was founded initially. But now we're kind of seeing this situation where like Sam Altman doesn't really talk about extinction risk that much anymore. And it seems like OpenAI is kind of going full steam ahead on, building products, trying to make money. And ultimately, like we've seen a lot of reporting that the safety angle and the concerns about safety, we saw multiple safety teams get disbanded. Super alignment team was one of the big headlines where like Ilya and others ended up departing from the company. And a lot of people were warning that we don't think that OpenAI is going to handle safety responsibly. What has kind of the shift been like inside of OpenAI through this process where it was this very idealistic company, and now it seems, at least from the outside, like there's a lot more of a focus on money over safety?
Yeah, I think tracing the roots of OpenAI on this front is interesting. You're right in describing that OpenAI was meant to be a nonprofit counterweight to DeepMind, which was building AGI within, the auspices of Google. And some of this is born from, I guess Elon's mistrust of Demis Hassabis, the now CEO of Google DeepMind, if you trust this reporting. For what it's worth, I mean, I think that Demis and Shane Legg, another of the co-founders of DeepMind, have been on record for a very, very long time taking these risks seriously and continue to talk about them seriously, even when it maybe isn't the most politically expedient thing to do. So, regardless of the original motivation, like I do think that Demis and Shane take these risks quite seriously. I definitely also perceive Sam and other OpenAI executives as talking less about extinction risk over time. Sometimes it seems like people think that talking about the quite serious catastrophic risks of AI is just hyping up one's product. Oh, it's so powerful. It's so good. Use it to write your emails for you. And I think that's a total misunderstanding of what is happening. I think there are many, many people within OpenAI, comms, legal, policy, who really, really do not want Sam or others within the company to talk about extinction risks, other catastrophic risks of how either people might use AI to do very destructive things, or, in worst cases where AI has goals different than what humanity wants for it, where AI engineers this on its behalf. I think it's telling that some of the most, I think, candid and clear ways that OpenAI executives have described this risk over time have been in off-the-cuff comments at panels. Sam Altman famously said that in the worst case, AI might mean lights out for us all. And I believe that he believes that. I also believe it. I wish I knew what conversations happened among the executive team on the heels of that, because I'm sure there were people who were pretty displeased to hear Sam say this quite so clearly. If anything, right, I think that the internal pressures go significantly against describing the risks of AI clearly. And that, when you're reading written statements from OpenAI, maybe people already assume this, I'm not sure. But I think the right frame is to look at a written statement and say, this is what the company has said, now that it has been heavily filtered and transformed and put, a rosier gloss on things. You can talk about the benefits. In fact, you always have to talk about the benefits. If you're going to mention any of the risks, maybe let's use less scary language. Let's make sure to hedge, maybe multiple times. And, there will be quite a lot of pressure in that direction rather than, if you are trying to describe the benefits where you can say ... and then we solve, enormous problem.
Yeah, one crucial thing of this is that we have seen this playbook of communications in the past, and we should expect no different. This is what is described in the book Merchants of Doubt about climate change and the tobacco industry. And this is classic tactics that were used by the tobacco industry in the past decades, where the best thing to do, I would say, and I speak as a former lobbyist, a bad lobbyist would just deny the risks. A good lobbyist would say, well, there are some risks, but there are also some opportunities. The main thing you want to communicate as a good lobbyist that spreads, essentially, that confuses people is to sow doubt. Highlight a little bit one side, highlight the other side, generally undermine the ability of people to actually see the truth, and never give a definitive answer. In many ways, tobacco has been one of the biggest funders of cancer research. Just by also funding cancer research, they've had the ability to influence the narrative and delay the eventual, inevitable time when people realize that tobacco does indeed, contribute to lung cancer and the crackdown that came from it. And a lot of these things, should be seen in the same light by the AI industry is no different. They're learning very well, and they're hiring some of the top lobbyists in the US, in Europe, and elsewhere to repeat this very successful playbook of never fully deny the risks, acknowledge them somehow, but also put it on the benefits and ultimately just delay the ability of regulators, governments, and so on to really understand what's going on and step in. And you're completely right that DeepMind's founders, Shane Legg and Demis, especially Shane Legg, did talk about extinction risk quite openly in the past, and they at least Demis Hassabis signed the Center for AI Safety extinction statement. The main issue though is like talking is not enough. Same with Sam Altman. I'm very, very happy that Sam Altman at some point in time was quite forthcoming with the risks. In 2015, he wrote this excellent series of 2 blog posts where he just openly opened by saying, superhuman machine intelligence is the greatest threat to the continued existence of humanity. There are now, the leaked emails where he did the exchanges with Elon Musk, where he's saying, well, I believe this essentially threatens humanity with full destruction, but if I don't believe it can be stopped fully, and if Google is doing it, I'd rather be us to be in control rather than Google. But ultimately saying things is not enough. Like, all of these people are very powerful. They are leading massive companies. If they wanted to, they could stop right now. And if they don't want to stop, we will need to find ways. We need to get governments to step in, as we've done with many other technologies, to steer this thing in the right direction.
Yeah, I think I'm maybe a bit more sympathetic to this point of view than you are, at least on an individual basis, right? Like, it is true that, Anthropic could pack it all in tomorrow and cease to exist. And, they will not end up building AGI. There will be relatively less pressure on other AGI companies racing to AGI who feel Anthropic nipping at their heels. I do think it's true that Anthropic can't easily, wake up tomorrow and say, let's do a global pause, let's do a global halt, let's do a global controlled, joint Manhattan Project type thing. I do think this is a big thing going on beyond the let's make all labor free, let's solve these grand challenges. People feel like there is a proverbial gun to their head, or maybe to the world's head, and that they don't really have the tools to do something about it. This has been one of my biggest dissatisfactions with OpenAI, actually. And when I left and I tweeted about being, pretty terrified about the pace of AI development, I wrote this thread that it was not trying to put OpenAI on blast. It was trying to acknowledge we have like terrible race conditions in the ecosystem right now. There's a big coordination problem. No one wants to let up, because if you let up, you lose out on the benefits in the case that AI goes well. And if AI goes poorly, it probably goes poorly in a way that brings everyone down with it anyway. So you aren't worse off, being the one to like bring this fate upon us than if someone else brought it upon us. And I was trying to point out, like, we need to actually coordinate. We need companies to do things like express to governments, hey, we would be willing to let up, have a mandatory testing period, have mandatory testing standards more akin to what you have in the automotive industry, so long as others do as well. And then you let the governments convene groups and make actual progress. There's sometimes rhetoric in the AI industry that leaves me very confused about how people think international law works. Like, international treaties are a thing. We have treaties around chemical weapons, biological weapons, non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. These are all things that exist, even though these are all powerful technologies that there is strong state interest to have a leg up in. And we've been able to overcome it before. I really think we could with AI if we decided to, but I don't think it's quite as easy as just waking up and deciding it. I do think it would be costly today. And part of what I think the important aims are to figure out ways to make it cheaper to do so.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. It's not free, but it's important. Like, a lot of people excuse behavior with the word incentives. A lot of people like the magic word incentives, or, they sometimes bring up like, well, the companies are locked in this terrible race, and it's nobody's fault. It's just, it's a coordination problem. And I mean, ultimately, it is a coordination problem that we will have to solve. But collectively it is. But individually, incentives don't excuse, bad behavior. Like, people can indeed pay big costs and stop and move on. In many ways, if, given the risks, these costs are not that high. You're just losing a few hundred millions, maybe. In some cases, you're losing a few billions in exchange for not literally endangering the lives of every single person on the planet, which are the risks that they themselves acknowledge, right, under their own frame. So, and I completely agree with you that, like, internationally, there's a combination of naivety or, not knowing about how things have been done in the past in terms of international and national politics. And also it's very self-serving. A lot of these companies, including, Anthropic, OpenAI, and so on, went on to actually spur more of international race dynamics, trying to like spur other countries to pick up on the notion of AGI, to pick up on the notion of superintelligence, and use it then as an excuse to say, well, if you stop us from building superintelligence, some of these other worse actors are gonna get there. And the reality is that also for that, we have ways to deal with it, and we shouldn't be naive. If superintelligence is built, it threatens all of us. It threatens, if it's built in the US, if it's built in China, if it's built in any other country, once superintelligence is built and once an intelligence explosion starts, this threatens the lives and the national security of every country on Earth. So, but the correct response is not, well, they're going to threaten us, so we should shoot ourselves in the foot faster and like, rush the cliff ourselves. The response should be like, well, we should use, the full might, diplomatic, economic, and potentially other types of pressure of the United States and of allied countries to make it very clear that, like, look, building superintelligence is a red line. Nobody should build this. Nobody should threaten the lives of everybody on the planet and the sovereignty of every country on the planet by building this technology. We are going to stop it. If you somewhere else try to do it, we're going to tell you not to, and eventually we're going to stop you. And that's, exactly as you said, like we've done this in the past. We've done it with nuclear weapons. We reached, there is a world where 50, 60, 70 countries around the world all have access to nuclear bombs. That's an extremely unstable world. That's a world where probably we're not alive here today to have this conversation. Even with just almost less than 10 countries around the world, we got very close to a nuclear apocalypse with Cuban Missile Crisis and so on. But we made it through. We made it through via non-proliferation agreements in like one of the most tense periods in history, the Cold War, with two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, competing on this. We've gotten through things even in some ways like even bigger and more larger consensus. Things like the de facto global moratorium on human cloning. Human cloning is an extremely economically and militarily advantageous technology. Imagine being able to clone all of your best scientists, to clone all of your best soldiers as a country. This is massively useful. In some ways, it's a similar vision to AGI, where you have, a country of geniuses in a data center. With human cloning, you have a country of geniuses in a, football field, like physically there. And in that case, scientists realized the implications. They just collectively brought it up to governments and said, we think this should just not be pursued. We think major countries around the world should agree to not pursue this. And indeed, we don't have human clones around, right? So we can do these things. We can make them happen, but they require clear common knowledge of the risks. They require governments to be aware and governments ready to take action and to also stop others that would cross these red lines that we all agree on.
Yeah, I think there's also an important thing that often gets overlooked when talking about doing international treaties with AI. And that's like usually when you kind of present the idea, people think of it as like an all or nothing. They'll say like, oh, you're never going to stop anybody from developing superintelligence forever. And I think that this is a bit of a misnomer because the goal isn't necessarily to prevent superintelligence for all of, the next 6,000 years of, human civilization. It's just that we are currently investing literally trillions of dollars every year now at this point, I think, or at least close to, in trying to make superintelligence as fast as possible with all of these top companies, all these top scientists, like with these massive data centers that are literally drawing nuclear power plants worth of power. We're reopening 3 Mile Island just to power an AI data center. And like, if you make this illegal, if the US and China sign an agreement and they say nobody's allowed to build superintelligence, it is a crime to build superintelligence. Like, you will go to jail. We will shut down your data center. We will send the people with guns to stop your data center. Like, this means that, maybe, yeah, like someone's going to try to build a basement superintelligence, but you don't have 10,000 H100 GPUs in your basement. And even if you do, that's drawing so much power from the grid that you can track that kind of thing. Like, there are ways that we can shut this down. And, you can also enforce this upon the scientists who are currently building this. And so if you were to implement this in the US and China, yeah, you don't necessarily stop superintelligence for all of the rest of human history, but you do slow it down. And you certainly buy us more time than the current breakneck pace that we're going at. So I think that it's definitely like much more of a tool in the toolbox that should be included in the conversation as we currently are in. And I do think it's a bit of a disservice to humanity that these AI companies refuse to kind of even really engage with this idea seriously when talking to lawmakers. Even presenting it as like, hey, this is a thing that could happen. It could potentially be effective. We think it's a bad idea because of whatever reasons they want to present. But instead, they're kind of pretending like it's a completely infeasible concept. And yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on this? Like, is this a thing that's, discussed more kind of behind the scenes? Or do people just not really pay much attention to this type of thing at these companies?
I have so many thoughts. I think you're totally right. We don't have to go forever without a super intelligence. The bar is not stopping this from ever being developed. We can increase our chance of success by delaying it some amount of time. And, even a 5-year period could be really transformative. I hear discussion from people who are deeper in the hardware than I am that, maybe we will figure out what are called on-chip governance mechanisms. The idea that you can actually control what a particular GPU is being used for, or you have more direct oversight over individual chips. But we can't do this today. It's going to take time to come about. And so that's an example of one thing that delaying some time could buy us. Another example is I just know from talking to people throughout the field, I've written a bit about this, the state of safety within the companies and their level of preparedness to catch if there were a powerful misaligned superintelligence that they had built is just woefully inadequate today. There are all sorts of mitigations that you would hope that these companies have in place that they don't have in place. I give the example in one of my blog posts about how the AI companies are largely not monitoring internal use of their most powerful models, even if they're using it for sensitive use cases like enlisting their most powerful frontier AI to work on the security code that keeps the AI system boxed within their company. And so, that's like really not great. It's probably fine for the strength of today's systems, but who knows for whenever a more powerful system comes about. And so I also think it would be great if companies had time to sit down and really invest in beefing up these types of systems. One objection you sometimes hear is that pausing, going slower, etc., don't really make sense because, ultimately you need to contain the risks of the most frontier systems. And those truly frontier systems, ones we ultimately need to be really worried about, don't exist today. And so how could you possibly plan in advance? We need to race ahead to this point where a really, really powerful, scary system exists. And at that point, we can study it and figure out how to mitigate it. I just think that's totally incorrect. Maybe that would be the case if we had no good ideas sitting around that people wanted but hadn't already implemented. That's just not what is happening in the AI field. There are all of these very, very obvious ideas that I think many people sitting down, reflecting for half an hour would say oh yes, of course this should happen. I am really surprised it has not yet happened. Monitoring your internal use of these systems is one example. And that doesn't really depend on the nature of one AI system versus another. We don't need to know anything about GPT-6 to know that it would be useful to monitor the traffic of GPT-6 when it is writing security critical code within your company. And that's another example of how pausing buys us time to catch up, because right now the safeguards that companies have in place just are inadequate.
Yeah, and yeah, you're completely correct. And ultimately, there's a simple thing going on here. Arguments, many arguments you hear are just arguments are soldiers. They are the bottom line has been written first. There's a few people on the planet that really want to build superintelligence. They've committed to this. They've built multi-billion, multi-tens of billions, maybe soon multi-hundreds of billions dollar companies for this goal. And all arguments are going to arise to justify this, and they're going to be incoherent over time. We've seen in some of this stuff, at some point, people excusing racing ahead by saying oh no, if we don't race ahead now, there's going to be a compute overhang. Meaning that there's going to be we would rather get now to these very powerful systems with less compute lying around, so we can I don't know, contain them because there's gonna be a physical limit to how much compute they have access to, and then seeing, you know, the same people build up enormous amounts of data centers all around the world to like scale up this amount of compute. So ultimately, a lot of these arguments are just self-serving. There's the main thing is a few people really want to build superintelligence. They've been obsessed about this for decades now. Like people like you know, the DeepMind started in you know, in before even the 2020s, in like 2014 and 2015, before, you know, Shane Legg wrote his own like doctoral dissertation on machine superintelligence. He coined the term AGI in the early 2000s. Sam Altman has been thinking about this since 2015. People like Dario Modei have been thinking about this since you know, the early 2000s. Some of them even earlier. Some of them since the Extropian mailing lists at the end of the 90s. And ultimately, that's just the big difference. The majority of people here on the planet, the majority of politicians, the majority of world leaders, when they understand what superintelligence is, they don't want it. They don't want to have an AI that are smarter than them and they're just like a new species on Earth, except more powerful than us, that we are at the mercy of. You know, we, like, a lot of people want a bunch of AI things. You know, AI is a tool. AI is a tool that can help us, and that's great. You know, it's also great. It's also fantastic for companies to make money. I have nothing against money. Making money is great. Capitalism is great. But the real thing is that the main driver is a few people just want to build superintelligence, just want to usher in this new type of intelligence that is stronger than humans. Some of them to have it succeed us, some of them just as a grand challenge in itself. Some of them, you know, who knows why, but ultimately everything is driven by that. And a lot of the arguments shouldn't be taken at face value because they're not serious. They're incoherent. They change over time. They just fit whatever needs to be said at the moment to just keep pushing ahead without regulation.
I wonder what happens with this over time. Sam has definitely tweeted something to the effect of, you know, a belief that people should have a say in whether superintelligence is developed.
I agree.
I would like to better,
We should.
yeah. Like, I would like to better understand what form that comes about in. You know, I guess maybe there's some roundabout argument that people in the U.S. have elected the U.S. government, and to the extent that the U.S. government doesn't intervene, you know, I guess maybe that fulfills this claim in a representative democracy type way. I don't think that was what was intended with the tweet. I think the tweet was meant to convey something more like direct democratic participation. But I also understand, right? Like, we probably aren't going to do a ballot referendum of every person in the US. Like, ultimately, I don't know. I think there's a lot of gesturing at wanting people to have a say in this, but by default, it's just going to get built. This is going back a little bit, but I think the point of arguments to soldiers is a really interesting one. I have wondered to what extent the US-China race right now is a boogeyman in some sense. You know, there's this telling of the atomic race, the race to build a nuclear bomb, that many scientists joined the US effort initially, in part because they felt they were racing with the Nazis and they wanted to get to a nuclear weapon before the Nazis did. And then, you know, I'm a little out of my depth here, but my understanding is it became clear that, in fact, the Nazi program was not especially close to developing it. And very, very few of the scientists in the US program actually then walked away. I think possibly only one scientist, even though ostensibly, you know, this was a reason to do it because we needed to get there first. And, you know, it's like kind of hard to quibble with how this ended, maybe, right? Like the West won the war, Nazis largely went away. And so, you know, maybe there was, in fact, advantage in having this weapon and having it sooner, even though the Nazis weren't especially close. But I do think it speaks to like people's changing motivation over time. You can say that you're enlisting in this bloody, you know, I have to do it or else you'll do it to me type of thing. And then you learn that, in fact, you aren't under threat and you still might not walk away.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, again, in many ways, is if you sincerely believe you're under threat, then you should try to stop the adversary from building it. And I think this is that's a sensible position to say, like, look, we are concerned that some other country is building superintelligence. Let's put pressure on them right now to stop. we think superintelligence endangers everybody, let's stop them. You wouldn't, if you heard tomorrow that like some other country was developing a super virus that would kill millions of people, let's say a super Ebola, right? Your answer, as if you were any kind of decent national security expert, wouldn't be, oh yeah, let's develop super Ebola faster ourselves and spread it to our own citizens. No, you would find ways to find those centers, get them shut down, get the other country to stop, credibly threaten it. So yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of this is very self-serving. You can also see in the rhetoric over time, like, this is a kind of a new rhetorical innovation of a lot of these lobbying efforts. In the past, Sam Altman used to say that he wanted to have government auditors in the OpenAI buildings in an interview with, I believe, Kara Swisher a few years ago, like just 2 or 3 years ago. And now he testifies to Congress stating that we don't need to have too burdensome regulation, otherwise we're going to lose to China. Which one is which? Is it superhuman machine intelligence is the greatest threat to the existence of humanity, or is it, oh no, a little bit of regulation is gonna make us lose a competitive advantage? Those two things can't really go together. And of course, it's also important. We need to get the biggest thing on your point about public awareness and democratic input in this. I think that's ultimately how such major scale decisions should be done. We don't have mechanisms to actually like genuinely extrapolate what each voter in every single country, very often not even in a single country, really believes. But definitely right now the decision is not legitimate, even via those like the roundabout way of like, well, the U.S. government is not intervening and it's technically elected. Like most of the U.S. government, most U.S. lawmakers and most lawmakers in every country in the world just don't know what's coming. There is no informed consent here. That's something we're working on at ControlAI. We've met over 100 lawmakers to explain to them what's superintelligence. When experts think it's coming, what the risks are, and most of the reactions, as elected officials of the public, are kind of, holy shit, I didn't know about this. This is really concerning, and like, obviously something should be done about this. So, yeah. And same with the public. We see that the more the public is exposed to this, the more their answer is resoundingly clear. And building this common knowledge is going to be a crucial factor in actually making sure that AI, and especially the powerful AI systems, are developed without threatening everybody. Most people know what they want. They want AI tools that help them. They don't want a superintelligence that replaces them and becomes a successor species.
I think that just about does it for time for us. We're going to close out the podcast here. Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on. This has been a really, really interesting conversation. I've learned a lot about kind of what's going on behind the scenes at OpenAI, and I hope the audience did as well. Are there any closing remarks from you that you'd like to give us? And afterwards?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stephen. It's been a pleasure. It's thanks to people like you that humanity is able to fight against the risks that are coming. And if, as we discussed, in this conversation, the most important thing is common knowledge, making sure that people understand what's really coming, making sure the governments understand what's really coming. And thanks to the work that you do, this makes it possible so that we can get together, organize, put in place defenses against losing control to superintelligence, and build a good future.
Thanks. I appreciate you saying that, and thanks for having me on. If people want to keep up with my work, they can check it out at stephenadler.substack.com, Stephen with a V, and would really love the feedback on what's working, what's not, what posts you want to see more about, and hopefully we can get better coverage and understanding of these risks.
Yeah, absolutely. Go check out Stephen's stuff. It's great reading.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.